All right, y'all, we are back. Sorry for that little delay there, but now we'll have a nice recorded episode for all of the people who listen at home on YouTube. Which, again, by the way, you can find all our old episodes on our YouTube channel. Before we start, as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may, in fact, turn out to be. So, the first show of the new year, 2019. I hope all y'all had a great New Year's. You didn't get too hung over the next day.
New year, new hangover.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm sure there will be lots of new, shiny new injustices this year that we will be talking about on the show. But as we do at the end of the year, has kind of been a tradition on the program, we take a look back and look at the year that was. So this was year 2 of the Trump administration, and when I was kind of getting stuff ready for the show, one of the bad things that I realized, it's like a lot of the atrocities were just kind of blurring together. Like, I couldn't remember. I was like, did we start throwing immigrant children in cages in 2017 or 2018? Well, technically, we've been doing that practice for a long time, even longer than the Trump administration, but certainly not as widespread in use. But yeah, that is a problem, though. What we call it, outrage fatigue, I believe, is kind of the term for that. You hear about terrible stuff in the news so frequently that you more or less become numb to it. It's kind of it's a permutation on the whole Overton window concept, but instead of like talking about the political spectrum shifting left or right, you're basically talking about like the level of awful stuff that people become enculturated and not necessarily okay with, but accustomed to, I guess would probably be the best way to put it. So yeah, this was yet another year where the morality of the American body politic kept playing limbo and kept asking, how low can we go? Yeah, pretty dang.
Gosh darn.
I think DAMN is okay to say on air, but I can't remember. So just to be safe, gosh darn it, let's be careful with our 4-letter words here.
Can't mess with the diddly darn FCC there. So yeah, a lot did happen this year. I too am having a bit of hard time, determining what kind of horrible stuff was happening in 2017 versus 18. But I feel like 2018 was at least a little bit better than last year. Like, I still remember when 2016 was ending, and people were like, "Oh my God, it's finally over. 2016 is gonna be no more of that."
Wait.
Yeah, they really didn't understand what I'm sure plenty of people did, but what was really coming up was definitely going to be worse, and we're getting that. Mm-hmm. So, is there anything you want to start talking about? I'm looking through some of our older episodes, seeing what we went over.
Oh yeah, and as I said before, this episode is going to be a little bit more fast and loose. Then kind of recapping our highlights from the year. So I guess I did want to start out by talking, about. A couple of trends that I noticed this year because let's start with something positive on the positive end, but of course with its own critiques. So two positive things I want to start off with that both involve the media. This will be on our we don't have an official list or anything, but it's top 10 good things about this year. But this would be in a hypothetical top 10 if we were actually doing that. But one of the good things that happened this year. So, if you're a long-time listener, one of the things we talk about on the show the most is voter suppression and election fraud. And these are two subjects, basically the same subject, really, but that do not really get enough discussion in mainstream circles, and not only mainstream circles, but even a lot of the progressives you see on the national stage do not call attention to this issue. This goes all the way back to. Well, not all the way back, but voter suppression, of course, has been going on in this country since it began. But let's frame it in a more recent context. I think a lot of people became very much aware of voter suppression and election fraud via the 2016 election. Democratic primary, as we have discovered since then, was basically bought and rigged by the Clinton campaign. She basically purchased the Democratic Party National Committee outright. However, something that kind of fell to the wayside and never, this really has never been reckoned with still. There were significant disparities with exit polls in many of the primary states, sometimes by a margin of 15 to 20 points, things that just are statistically impossible when you're talking about the margins of error. And there were also, we discussed a lot of news stories back then about these voting machines, easily hackable. Some of these voting machines either owned by companies with connections to the Clintons or literally overseen by their own personal friends. We've seen also, New York, the New York City, it was discovered that, yes, those I believe it's 500,000 ballots. No, 100,000 ballots?
Something in the 100,000s. Yes. Mostly focused on Brooklyn. Yeah. Like, if we're talking about the 2016 Democratic presidential primary, of course it was in Brooklyn because that's where Bernie's from, and that's where he's got that obvious accent.
So if you kind of started, and here's where I'm going with this. If you started paying attention to that issue around then, you would have noticed that there was a tremendous media blackout on this. Even a lot of independent media at the time, like Democracy Now! Or the Young Turks, didn't really touch this. Certain people did. I know Lee Camp of Redacted Tonight talked about it a lot. Of course, he's an evil Russian. Evil Russian comedian,
just like us.
Just like us. Well, anyway, and then by the way, if you want to learn more about this, Greg Palast did some significant and wonderful work in 2016, not only on the Democratic primary but also in the general election. This is something we repeat on the show again and again and again. If you want to blame any one individual for Trump's election, and let's be clear, it was a cascade of very dense economic, sociological, and geopolitical factors that got him to office. But if you want to just break down the math and be like, here's the votes and here's what happened, you gotta blame Chris Kobach, because it was his cross-check. It was his cross-check, interstate cross-check system that literally deleted enough people off of the ballots for Donald Trump to win in states like Wisconsin, states like Michigan. And how interstate cross-check worked, of course, if you haven't heard us rant about it on the show before, just in a nutshell, is it cross-references names in bordering states. If your name too closely resembles a name that's on the ballot list, not the ballot list.
It wasn't just in bordering states. It was, I'm pretty sure it's with any state that's within the cross-check system. So, basically, if you have a name that's too similar to someone else in, like, Florida or Georgia or Indiana or whatever, like, even if it's, like, a completely different middle name or a suffix that you don't have or a different spelling of your first or last name, you could still consider it as being, like, registered twice, and they'd take you off. Never mind that it's legal to register in two separate states in a number of states.
Yeah, precisely. And, not to mention it. So the idea is like it's going to inhibit voter fraud, which voter fraud, as described as like somebody voting more than once, is completely statistically insignificant. I think they found like 15 people or something who did it in the last election. Of course, the GOP raises it as specters like as a force that actually like wins and loses elections, and that's really malarkey. That is not you. If you were smart about it, that is not how you would rig an election, because it would take so much manpower. It would take because think about what that actually means. That means somebody physically going to vote somewhere, driving to a different state and then voting again. How many people are you actually going to be able to find to do that? Especially like, ostensibly working class people that, they always allege like, oh, it's these working immigrants and stuff that they get to vote twice. And it's like, doesn't make any sense. Those people don't have time. Most of those people don't even have time to vote once. So what happened in the media this year that was different? Well, we saw them time and time again ignoring this voter suppression, election rigging. Even we talked a little bit about it in that election with Jon Ossoff. Some of the numbers there were kind of off. And again, the mainstream media did not talk about it until a gubernatorial candidate came along named Stacey Abrams. Mm-hmm. And I really want to tip our collective hat to her for being having a national platform and calling out some BS that literally the rest of the Democratic Party did not have the wherewithal, the cojones, or the foresight to call out in plain terms. And whatever else you think about Stacey Abrams, I think she did us all a tremendous service by dragging these issues into light. Her election and just how ridiculous it was. She was running against a guy who was the Secretary of State and in charge of his own election.
It was worth mentioning that was actually what was happening in the Jon Ossoff race as well. The woman that he ran against was also the Secretary of State at the time, and she was definitely leveraging her power to mess with the election there. And this isn't the first or last time something like this has happened. Like even here in Michigan, to localize it, like when there was some like machine glitch in Detroit that took tens of thousands of people off the voter roll. No, it didn't take them off the rolls. It just didn't count their votes. And there was a lawsuit that was going to Michigan to get a recount for it, but Attorney General Bill Schuette put the hammer down on that. Now, if something like that happened again, he might be our governor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely. Probably like the turning point for me, and I was working third shift at the time. I would see CBS Morning News for the end of my shift, and they were bringing up the Georgia election race and saying voter suppression on like national mainstream media television. So I think that's done a lot of great. At least I think there's a greater awareness of this problem. Like I said, it now has mainstream penetration. You have a lot of the more liberal types who don't necessarily pay attention to this kind of stuff understanding, oh wait, a lot of places in America the vote is indeed rigged. And well, it'll be interesting to see how subsequent elections play out with that kind of awareness. But again, I thought that was a really good, positive development. I think I'll jump to another media-related international story that again brought a lot of media attention to an otherwise ignored issue. We're talking about primarily the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but there's some issues surrounding that we want to really get to. Now, obviously, I think this was a huge national story. It still is. But here, the interesting implications of the Khashoggi murder put a spotlight on our relationship with Saudi Arabia, which we've pretty much had this very tight-knit, close relationship with the Saudis since roughly the Roosevelt administration. And we've always, unfortunately, looked the other way when the Saudis were being bad actors. And by bad actors, I mean their government is still one of the most barbaric regimes on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They will public beheadings of dissenters. They got a lot of good press. Earlier in the year for we're going to let women drive. Of course, the women who had been protesting and fighting for that are currently still in prison, and may in fact end up getting death sentences. So where Jamal Khashoggi comes in, it's it's interesting to me because and I don't want to underplay how horrific his death was. Like it's very gruesome, and it's outrageous in its own right. It really is. But what is interesting to me is how, what was it that got people to really question our relationship with the Saudis? And, it wasn't them just firebombing Yemen into a flat-out genocide. And let's never forget about that, because that Yemen, because of Saudi bombing, it is experiencing the worst famine on the planet. You've got millions of people sick, malnourished, and many children, and of course, a lot of that is our own munitions. It was a Raytheon bomb that blew up that school bus full of 40 children that you may or may not have heard about. That did become a news story for several days, and a few mainstream pundits actually were talking about it. I will tip my hat off to Chris Hayes. Usually the tentacles of that corporate paycheck keep him from talking about anything, too critical of the American empire. But even he was like, wait a minute, this is pretty messed up. Our tax money is blowing up innocent people. That's no good. So, there was kind of a cynical part of me that said, it's like, because the big reason people paid attention to Jamal Khashoggi, because let's face it, if he was an independent journalist from, say, like, I don't know, like Al Jazeera or, even like a left-wing network that you might find here in the United States, or a satellite country like Telesur, or, Democracy
RT.
Now!, RT. If it had been a journalist from one of those outlets, I don't know, I'll ask you, Nora, do you think it would have become an international story?
I doubt it. I really doubt it. Like, I mean, I can't really say for sure. It was like, what the Saudis did was like gruesome and out in the open in ways that they really haven't done before. Mm-hmm. But one thing that is worth mentioning is how much more dangerous this year has been for journalists than any other.
That is true.
Like, there was that one guy, that Trumpster, who went into like that CNN building and opened fire on people. It's increasingly dangerous for journalists in Myanmar and Mexico. People are getting caught and killed and captured. The DNC is still trying to sue Julian Assange while the U.S. feds are trying to like extradite him and isolate him and all this, which is all really disturbing. And it's really important that we continue to get the truth out there like this. But it just gets more dangerous bit by bit. And like, I'll tip my hat to Time Magazine for naming journalists, I guess the guardians of the free press, is the person of the year. But like, how much of it is like the whole distraction of Trump's saying mean things about the media, or he won't let Jim Acosta, CNN stooge, talk at him about a question that everybody's already asking. Like, I don't know. It is a big concern what's going on in response to like people doing honest to God tough work journalism, and it makes me worried like with what's going to happen to our own show maybe if this escalates. Like, we're seeing increased censorship from Silicon Valley, from Facebook, YouTube, etc. I think this year, I guess, kind of jumping off of that, was a big year of social media websites like just kind of trying to crack down on their own control against the wishes of their own user base. Like, nobody's asking for any of the stuff that Twitter or Facebook or Tumblr have been doing. I guess beyond like banning, like occasional banning of fascists, which thankfully deplatforming fascists has proved to work this year, as we've seen with Richard Spencer's visit to Lansing. And I know I just could bounce between like 2 or 3 different topics there.
Yeah, that's another bit of good news, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was not at the forefront of the mind. But Michiganders, pat yourselves on the back, because we are the state that got Richard Spencer to go back into his little fascist cave.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye, indeed. And yeah, actually, do you mind, I'll bounce off that a little bit. I actually did want to talk about that a little bit. I was there back in March, and it's funny because we still have debates. There's still debate about like the best way to deal with the resurgence of fascism and whether meeting them with violence, and I would call it like self-defense really is the appropriate tactic. I really think not only that, the proof is in the pudding as far as when you do this work to combat fascists where they show up. It does have a tangible effect. And I think, standing up to that kind of speech where it occurs, it's important because it kind of protects and insulates these communities. And again, it discourages these fascists from organizing in the future. And I will say, I think it was really effective because not only did you see Richard Spencer decided to retreat back into private life, also shortly after the demonstrations in Lansing, the transcendental what's the word? I'm having a brain fart.
So after
a fascist group, the Traditionalist Workers Party. That's right. Thank you, Nora. I don't know, my brain's not working today. But the Traditionalist Workers Party dissolved and fell apart shortly after this also. Now, I do also want to kind of, let's do a little bit of a critique because I do want to address like certain things that do come up and are very valid points. I'm in the middle of reading. I got Chris Hedges' new book for Christmas. It's the America: The Farewell Tour. And he's known for, he is very much against anti-fascists. He thinks that it kind of it gives fodder to not only reactionaries but also like news media to create that false equivalency between the right and the left. And I will say I think there is a line there, and I have seen certain people like, what is the definition of a fascist and what is just a reactionary and what is somebody on the left with a bad opinion. So, in his book, Chris Hedges talks about, he details basically being harassed by a lot of people describing themselves as anti-fascist, people showing up to his events and protesting him. And again, this is Chris Hedges. This is like a leftist former war correspondent. He's one of the most capable like political philosophers of our time, I would even say. Not to like gush on him too much, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff I disagree with him about. I think his opinions on anti-fascist work, I think his opinions on sex work in particular are kind of onerous and incorrect. But again, I think he's a valuable person. And even if I didn't think that, if I didn't watch a show or I thought all of his books were garbage, I think it is going too far when you apply anti-fascist tactics to people who either just do not disagree or do not agree with your tactics, or B, to people who may not necessarily be fascist. Maybe they're definitely reactionaries, but that's where you run into trouble. I think it is important to shut down actual, like, I'm talking like capital F fascists, but if we're talking about people who've just been listening to a lot of propaganda on Fox News, you're only going to alienate people. And yeah, I think in that case, yeah, you are going to create that false equivalency between fascists and anti-fascists. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess it's a difficult line to really put down because, like, what does Fox News even tell people? That, like, infinitely detaining migrants is okay?
Yeah,
that, like,
true.
separating children from their families is totally fine? To dehumanize trans people? That like, endless war is okay? Like, these... That is, as well as, that sort of, like, excessive capitalist draining of, like, the planet is also okay. Like, these are things that would characterize, like, fascism normally, and I think there's a case that is still, that's at least pretty close. but like you can't really approach it quite the same way because, as you said, that's like strategically kind of tone deaf. Yeah.
I think, like, yeah, that was. I'm glad that you said the S word, strategy, because I think that's really just what it boils down to. Like, you don't use, if all you have is a hammer, every problem is going to look like a nail. And in particular, I think, like, the left needs to make sure every tool in that toolbox is being used, and we are accessing our toolbox strategically. Sometimes you need to get that hammer of justice, that fist, and throw it through Richard Spencer's face. But I think sometimes, you can need to take account of, like, is this somebody I can actually have a conversation with? Is this something that, an aggressive or, tactic will work, or, maybe something a little bit more diplomatic will work better. And I particularly, I want to make it clear, too, when I'm talking about the tools in the toolbox and the idea of, like, talking to reactionaries or using a less than aggressive or abrasive stance, that really falls on white people, and particularly white cis people to do. I am not advocating any marginalized group to go out there and try to, like, have play patty cake with reactionaries. That is dangerous, and I would not condone that, because somebody who will maybe have a nice calm conversation with my white bearded butts might get all aggressive towards somebody who is trans or black or Muslim. And I think also when we're talking about strategy, we also need to understand our enemy a little bit better too, because another big story from this year, we talked about kind of this reactionary flyer from Comstock, and this happened pretty close to the end of the year. I think it was early December, late November. And, they were using a lot of, like, dog whistly language, talking about these criminal immigrants who are going to disrupt our way of life and contribute nothing to our community. And something you got to understand, it's like they do not understand dog whistles are dog whistles. It's, especially in a lot of white America, their concept of racism is calling someone a bad name. They don't understand. No, racism talks about, like, systemic injustice.
No, what you say is funny because it's true, because unless, it's so hard to get, like, conservative white people to, like, really believe something's racist unless it's directly connected to what they would agree is a hate group, and or if someone said, like, the N-word or something.
Yeah, because, like, you think about it, like, so I'm using the Comstock flyer as an example, but, if you were to replace every instance where they used immigrants with Mexicans, it would have been obviously racist. And most of these immigrant workers are either Mexican or from Central America. There's like a clear racial dimension to that. But because we use the word immigrants, like they were like, how can you possibly say that this is racist? We're just saying that we're just saying all of the immigrants coming up here could be violent criminal rapists. But you try to, like, break that down for them, and they don't want to listen, because once you accuse them of being racist, their mind just shuts down. They turn to, like, these defensive shrieking velociraptors, as we've said on the show before. It's difficult to kind of talk to a reactionary about that in that way. I'd say my biggest advice is try to frame it around working class issues, and particularly, learn your history, man. Like, if you get all this stuff is very much cemented in tactics that have been used since this country's founding. One of my biggest takeaways from a book I recently read called Radicals. It was called Radicals in the Barrio. And the tactics that they were using back then in the late 19th and early 20th century to divide, immigrant Mexican workers from poor white workers, and Japanese workers and black workers. It was all about creating these false hierarchies. And while they may not say like the N word or the S word now, the coded language they use has the same purpose. It's dividing the immigrants from the the white working class, and bring up like examples from history where this stuff has happened. And at first the knee-jerk reaction is like, well, that was then and this is now, but you can get most reasonable people to say it's like, well, the past does inform the present. That's how we got where we are now. So I didn't necessarily think I was going to get in this whole tirade about talking to reactionaries, but I think that is one of the takeaways that I had from my own kind of orbit around anti-fascist politics is, there does need to be an effort to still reach out. And when I talk about understanding the enemy, so let's take the Threepers, the 3%ers. They're a militia group that have been known to, like, their rhetoric literally talks about, like, we're going to get trained up in a military-like way to, one, prep, kind of like a doomsday prep element to it. And also an aspect to it of, literally, like, they openly talk about training to kill leftists. But you talk to them, and this is actually an interesting bit from that Chris Hedges book I was just talking about. He actually goes and sits down with a married couple who were part of the 3% militia. And the way they frame their whole thing is like, it's all about defending the West, defending American values. And they talk about people. Yeah, and they talk about being inclusive, basically inclusive to everyone except Muslims, because it's a huge thing. Like, these right-wing people, they really, really think that the Muslims are coming to take over, to create Sharia law and stuff. And like, you or I, it's just like, that's ridiculous. Like, but it's easy to make a boogeyman out of somebody who you've never met, you don't really know. And it's interesting how, like, in that book they talked about, it's like they don't see themselves as being like racist or looking at things through a racialized lens. It's like, anybody can join our group. They talk about how there's a lot of, like, well, there's a lot of homosexuals in the group as well, but it's just this way of framing your political ideology around these kind of these chauvinistic, misogynistic tenets of capitalism and reactionary behavior that it's hard for them to decode and understand. But if you don't understand how your enemy is thinking, if you think they're all just kind of racist people who are covering it up, no, they genuinely in their own minds do not understand the racism of what is coming out of their mouths. And that's got to be a really important piece before you can understand a lot of how these groups like the Proud Boys and the Threepers and all of them function, because it's not that they're trying to cover up their own racism with code words. It's that they genuinely don't think that they are being racist, even though de facto all of their activities basically do that. And of course, you do have people in those groups who are overtly racist, but that's how a lot of these kind of neo-fascist groups are operating now, is they have this idea of false inclusiveness, even though in practice they're still being fascistic and they're still targeting marginalized communities.
Yeah, I think we're getting a bit into the weeds of it here. Like, I still wanted to talk about what's going on in 2018.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Like, I guess on the topic of like fighting fascism, like, I know we're going to talk about like, maybe giving awards like the best and the worst of the year or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say like worst of the year goes to at least on the international level, goes to Bolsonaro, because
gosh.
So if so there were some good things that happened in 2018, but overall it was a confirmation of hopelessness, I would say. Yeah. Because like, I think to date he might be the only international leader other than Trump to deny climate change and put members in his cabinet to deny climate change, and go so rapidly in the opposite direction that would all but guarantee us to be doomed after a UN report tell us we only have 12 years left.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest story of the year, the IPCC report. And
the media covered that a little bit more. That's something else good about the media.
That's true. I think it's getting a little bit difficult for even the mainstream corporate media to ignore this. It was one of the mainstream shows at CNN. It was Chuck Todd, I think, has said he is no longer going to have climate deniers on his show.
Thank God.
So, I mean, there's
you have 12 years left. Like,
yeah, 12 years, man. Good God. And yeah, what's so horrible about Bolsonaro and what's so scary is that, you know, we have a climate denier who, okay, now we have a climate denier running the most powerful empire on the planet, and that's America, and we have a climate denier running a country where just happens to have an important forest.
You might have heard of it.
You might have heard of it. It came before the product shipping monopoly, Amazon. The Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the world, are now under the quote-unquote protection of a man who basically wants to privatize the whole thing and
also kill off all the people that live there.
Yeah. I mean, under basically his ultimatum to indigenous folks is like, modernize, get with modern society, or F you, I don't care. Like, he has basically promised to sell off these people's land, and, you know, to the indigenous people that live there is basically just like, I don't really care what you do. You know, you're going to have to move out when I sell this land. So I imagine a lot of these indigenous folks are going to want to defend their homes.
They are planning to fight back, but they're going to have a big uphill battle to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like he's just getting inaugurated right now. I don't know what the resistance is going to look like against him, but I hope it's active. Yeah. He doesn't quite have full majorities in both of the legislative bodies yet.
Not yet, no.
But I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. Like, it's really concerning, and of course, it wouldn't have happened if like the Brazilian establishment didn't like essentially do a soft coup by kicking out the popular candidate that would have most certainly beaten him. Almost certainly beaten him. And I guess one kind of interesting sort of counterpoint thing. One of the things that helped push him to victory was the fact that he was attacked during a campaign rally, like physically, and he has to be in the hospital for a while, so it made it really hard for opposition parties to criticize him. Yeah. So, like, I mean, if the person's aim was a little bit better, or if they didn't do it, then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But that's what's happening. I guess in other, like, in good news in Latin America, we did get in Mexico elected their own, like, radical leftist indigenous politician as president. And I haven't heard a lot of what he's done since he got elected, but he seems to be following through with his promises. Like, he's already searching for some of the children and journalists that have gone missing, which is great news. Yeah.
AMLO, we're talking about, who's been described as kind of like the Bernie Sanders type of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he's not officially in office yet. I don't think.
Oh, no, he got inaugurated later last year.
Oh, he did? Okay,
so, like, it's on a different timeline than a lot of other countries.
Okay. So one thing I do know something I found really interesting, and I'm not sure where this has progressed since, but he was trying to cut a deal with the Trump administration, essentially kind of create like some refugee camps and housing for these migrants and refugees on the Mexican border in return for money from the United States to basically enact a Marshall Plan style initiative in a lot of these Central American countries that we have basically destroyed through coups and economic.
Which are why the Central American quote unquote caravan is having to come here in the first place.
Yes, exactly. And I thought that was like a very clever, very, very good leftist position to have, because like one thing we're always talking about on the show is like, you're not going to solve any of these problems unless you get to the root of them and you solve like the what is causing these problems. So I thought that was a very inventive way for somebody like AMLO to try to work with the Trump administration. And I did just want to comment briefly on Bolsonaro. other thing about Bolsonaro, bringing up the fact that, there was that candidate who was very popular with the Brazilian people. He had
Lula, I believe he went by.
Lula. He'd previously been the president of Brazil in the 2000s, was very successful, very good economy and standard of living in Brazil while he was president.
Tens of thousands were lifted out of poverty.
Yeah. He's basically a social democrat, kind of on the same wavelength as somebody like Bernie Sanders. And it almost, to me, was like a dark shadow of our own 2016 because, again, it was a corporate media that, in their own way, disenfranchised the progressive candidate. Granted, Bernie Sanders was not thrown in jail on dubious charges like what happened in Brazil. But once you took that populist left candidate off the table, it became much harder for his running mate to gain any traction, and for much easier for a repugnant figure like Bolsonaro to end up in power. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I did have a lot of international news on the mind going through, the recap of this year. I think perhaps some of the really good developments, I would say, with the Koreas. Another example of, I guess, Trump accidentally stumbling into doing the right thing, although it was perhaps more the work of the leaders of both the Koreas.
Oh yeah,
realizing that we need to cut out the middleman and handle this problem ourselves.
Yeah. I can't underscore how much it's Moon Jae-in, president of South Korea, really got this rolling. That was one of his main campaign promises when he ran for. Was it president or prime minister? Okay, president of South Korea. And he's been really doing most of the work when it comes to brokering peace between the two countries. And I will say, I will give Trump this cookie. I'm glad that he was amenable to the idea of peace. I think under somebody more closely tied to the neoliberal paradigm, like a George W. Bush or an Obama type, it might have been a little bit more difficult for these countries to actually achieve peace. I think there would have been more going on behind the scenes, more arm twisting, that is. But it's kind of like with Trump being such a kind of chaotic figure, and the credibility of the United States just generally has been declining since the 2016 election.
It's been declining since the 2000 election.
I guess
even before then.
George W. Bush really brought us down in the eyes of the world. I think Obama was able to kind of, we talk about him putting a good face on the American empire. I think that was true at an international level as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of other countries at least thought, there's an adult at the table at least, and people still had their complaints about America, and then Trump came along and was just no, this
if you look at international approval ratings of U.S. presidents, Obama's consistently one of the highest, even for all his flaws and what he might have done to other, some certain countries that he might have bombed or other things. He still has a net positive approval that's significantly above any country that isn't Russia or Israel. Mm-hmm. Even then, he still had a pretty close approval rating to Israel.
But he was at least popular amongst all of the global power brokers.
Oh yeah,
I know there's a lot of those MAGA or QAnon types out there. It's well, that's why we like Trump, because all these oligarchs hate him. It's well. They don't. The reason they don't like him is mostly because he's really stupid, and he does not put a good face on the American empire. He'll just come out and say stuff that oh yeah, we're going over there for their oil. Yeah, it's you're supposed to say freedom and democracy. You got to use these pretty code words. Excuse me.
Any international stories you felt were really significant last
year? Yeah, I think, I talked about the Khashoggi murder and kind of the implications with that. Excuse me. One thing that happened right at the end of the year, we did talk about it last week. I was kind of curious what your input might be on it. But, the troop withdrawals from Syria and Afghanistan, and, in a sense, you had Trump coming out and like at least like kind of hedging towards some of his campaign promises about getting out of these wars to some degree. Again, I don't want to give him too much credit because, there's two things that really pop in my head. One, our drones are still there.
Yes.
And two, it wasn't really a full withdrawal. Afghanistan,
still have troops there.
There's still a lot of troops in Afghanistan, Syria.
Also, we started a new war in Niger.
Oh, we did start a new war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So, yeah, so let's talk about how, one, the reaction of the media was pretty gross. But let's also be mindful that this by no means makes Trump an anti-war president.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
So my thoughts on that situation was, I was seeing on Democracy Now! Not too a couple days after that he already picked like a new Secretary of Defense that was to replace Mad Dog Mattis. Now I don't remember the guy's name, I guess they don't grab as much attention as his initial cabinet might have, a lot of these replacements, but the guy used to be a lobbyist for Boeing. Yeah. And Boeing, they're a defense contractor, but specifically they make they're also known for making airplanes. So if you fly nationally or internationally, there's a good chance you might end up on one of those airplanes. Now, why is that significant? Because we already have plenty of. You're already still going to keep our drones in there. My theory as to the real reason why this troop withdrawal is that they're replacing the troops with the automated drones, which is also kind of disturbing because, for a number of reasons, on top of the whole endless war thing, the fact that this sort of robotic military technology keeps on getting better is those killer robots that we were warned about in sci-fi movies that took place in 2019. We're setting ourselves up for some not good stuff here if the robots decide they don't like us. Yeah. But that's a whole other discussion.
I think that I like that joke. It's if you were born Generation X or after, you weren't promised flying cars. You were promised a bleak cyberpunk dystopia. And I'm wow, here you go. Yeah, exactly what I was promised.
I'm waiting for Arnold Schwarzenegger to come back in time and save us.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. Even Harrison Ford, Texas murderous replicants.
Oh man.
One other thing, kind of put a fine point on that, and this is just reiterate something I said last time is, we can't look at troop withdrawals as equal to getting out of these endless wars because, like we said, we're still dropping so many bombs on so many innocent people. Collateral damage rates were really high under Obama. They've only gone up under Trump. And they're still going to be doing their thing, dropping bombs on people in Syria and Afghanistan and Yemen.
I'm glad that we haven't done that in Iran or Venezuela yet.
And keep in mind, they are still talking about that. The war drums are still being beat against Venezuela and particularly Iran. And with John Bolton, the warmongering walrus, still in Trump's administration, I don't see that necessarily becoming untrue anytime soon. And this also does remind me of an Intercept article from actually early last year, 2017. I think it's worth mentioning in this context. There was a huge push from people like Jared Kushner and others to privatize the war in Afghanistan.
That's also still a very likely possibility.
It is. I mean, how think about this. Imagine we do withdraw troops, but we end up leasing it out to groups like Blackwater. I mean, Blackwater doesn't actually exist anymore, but there are comparable mercenary groups that basically do the same function. And in that case, you would have, the American people, they wouldn't see our quote-unquote troops over there, but America would still have personnel. And, let's be completely frank. One of the reasons that, Blackwater got such a bad reputation is that mercenaries and groups like that, they tend to have less discipline. They tend to be
less
more
accountability
and just more flagrant with their human rights abuses. So we would basically have a paramilitary force over there more prone to committing atrocities while still dropping tons and tons of bombs and causing lots and lots of collateral damage. So got to make sure our view of endless war doesn't just mean no American troops on the ground. It means that we're not actively waging war on other people in these countries halfway around the world.
Yeah. Although I will say, like, some, I guess, positive developments in pushing back against our empire. The movement for Palestine has, like, significantly gone up in last year in ways that I've never seen before. Like, it's really made its way into the public consciousness in, like, but both, well, maybe not quite here in the U.S., but certainly in other parts of the globe as well. And the fact that, like, you know, the U.S. has hurt credibility among the world, but also our NATO allies, like, really does weaken our imperialism in a way. In fact, like, you know, Europe's still considering, like, doing their own, like, military organization outside of NATO, which we'll see if that happens, but it's about 7. Do we want to take a quick break, actually?
Yeah, I think that would be good. And then, you know, maybe when we come back, we can transition, talk about some, we've got some statewide and local stories we want to talk about over the course of 2018. So keep your dial locked. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Stay tuned for Wider's weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo.
Hi, my name is Maggie, and I'm the president for the German Club. German Club is an RSO on Western Michigan's campus that celebrates German culture through events and offers extra credit opportunities for German language students. We meet at Brown Hall. To find out more about the German Club, you can visit our Facebook at German Club at WMU.
This has been our weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo. For more information on how to spotlight your RSO, head to WIDRFM.org.
Hey y'all, we're back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. I'm here with Nora, and if you don't know, we're a radical leftist political talk show. We're going over some of the highlights, the lowlights of 2018. And we've got a few more things we want to talk about, particularly at the international level. We've got a lot of Michigan and Kalamazoo local stories, events, things that happened in 2018 we also want to get to and discuss. But I know you mentioned there's a couple things you wanted to hit on, Nora.
Yeah, so where we last left off, we were talking about, like, mostly international stories, and there's a lot of interestingly developments that happened in Europe. In Ireland, they got rid of the abortion ban and banned fracking in the country. Yeah.
Oh, good for the Irish. Yeah.
Also, what looks like it'll be good for the Irish is that Brexit appears to be on really shaky ground. Like, the Parliament can't really, you know, push through an agreement, and it might come to a second referendum, which is pretty likely to not pass.
Yeah.
And of course, just across the channel, you have like the Yellow Vest movement erupting in France.
Hey, yeah, that was some good praxis from across from our French friends and neighbors.
Yeah, we can definitely learn a thing or two from them. And I'm still disappointed that there's still some factors of it that have this racist angle to it, because there's been some interstate some really significant stories about race in France, like how the Spider-Man migrant who saved that kid, or the fact that their majority immigrant team won the football championships around the world for them. But I'm sure we'll see more interesting news coming out of there later. Maybe Macron will get ousted from this Yellow Vest movement. We'll see what happens.
So the latest I heard, and I think this is a really good example, because as it was going on, there's a lot of debates. I talked to a lot of people of different tendencies in the American left and the Marxist left and all that. And a lot of people just kind of full stopped at there's too much reactionaryism in the movement. And, it really did start as an all-inclusive, you had right-wing yellow vesters and left-wing yellow vesters. We actually, I was funny, showing the political chart meme, and there's one of every tendency. As it went along, you saw their demands started becoming more and more kind of leftist progressive, and you started seeing some of the language around immigration kind of soften and take on more of an internationalist character and flavor. And I think that's a really good example of that's, and granted, it's not perfect, and there's still a little bit too much of a nativist thing or aspect to the protests and their demands, but to the degree that it's been kind of pushed to the left and some of that more toxic rhetoric is taken out of it, that has been the work of leftist French folks on the ground doing what you're supposed to do when when you find yourself in a revolution and you've read all that Marx and stuff. You're supposed to try to guide these revolutionary moments the best as you can towards revolutionary anti-capitalist ideas and away from reactionaryism.
The different people, basically.
Yeah. And that's something that we should keep in mind, because we have had moments like this in America. I think a good place to point to would be Occupy. That was a good example. Unfortunately, one of the strengths and weaknesses of Occupy, it was such a large tent. There was not really a mechanism or idea to plan around issuing specific demands to a person or a government. But that could easily happen next time there is a mass uprising here in the States, and it's being able to capture that moment and help guide it in the right way. That's what a lot of the revolutions are about. Keep in mind, even the most successful revolutions in our history, look at the Russian Revolution, for example. It wasn't that Vladimir Lenin didn't just come out somewhere and be okay, we're going to start the revolution tomorrow at 3:00, and it's going to be all about creating a bunch of Soviet, socialist Soviets and workers committees. No, it was a general uprising of people who were upset with the class order and the subjugation of capital, and the Bolshevik Party was able to become that quote unquote vanguard party and guide it towards this kind of actual worker state. Now, whether it actually remained a worker state or not is a discussion for another time, but it is a case in point. Shows that what you got to do is you got to take these revolutionary moments and guide them towards revolution. They don't just come out fully baked for you, know. And I do want to salute the leftists in France for trying to push that movement further to the left. I'm sorry. Go on. Next
if
topic,
I were to get to give an award to, I guess, the best of 2018, I'd give it to the revolutionaries in France who are really fighting against one of the world's most powerful governments for the rights and things that they really deserve. I guess unfortunate news coming out of the West is that in Poland and Hungary they elected some fascists, and that they're currently scamming the EU out of tax dollars when they would normally be kicked out of it for their human rights abuses. but I'm not going to get too much in the weeds with that one. And of all places in Canada and Ontario, they elected Ford, which is very much a Trump-like figure, more than a lot of the other, like, you know, international fascist leaders, because he, like, you know, very much had this rude, like, machismo personality that was kind of like more, I guess, sloppy and out there than, like, you know, a Le Pen or a Bolsonaro might be. And it really baffles me in a lot of ways, because, like, this country is, like, right next to us, and, like, is supposed to have this, is, like, supposed to hold this you know, reputation of being friendlier and, like, knowing better than we do, and they're doing, like, the same thing in their largest province. Like, it's really disappointing. And they'll have to deal with that for 6 years.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this keeps playing out in the European state. You know, earlier in the year, there was, like, anti-corruption protests in Romania. You know, again, we're talking about this, like, Europe is a real hotbed right now for this kind of political activity, and also kind of on that more broad idea of, like, who's going to take the future? Is it going to be the revolutionaries or the reactionaries? And
it's almost like it's a whole continent full of white people.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, wow. Really? Yeah, that's true. All right, so I guess moving on. Was there were other international stories you wanted to tackle?
I think that's pretty much it that I can think of.
Okay, so I guess while we're on the topic of, like, revolutionary movements getting a reward or whatnot, I do want to hand it to kind of local group I've seen this year really kicking butt, taking names, getting stuff done. I want to give props to Movimiento Cosecha Kalamazoo. You know, in this year, I guess it was the end of last year, we got the county ID. But still, it was great. It was a huge help for our undocumented and homeless population, for kind of giving them a way in order to get identification. That was a hard struggle. Took them a better part of a year and a half. They got it done. And then they spent most of this year, about probably about 9 months, pushing Sheriff Fuller to stop ICE holds in the Kalamazoo County Jail. Now, for those of you who maybe didn't hear us when we were covering this story the first time, for the longest time, it was permissible. Now, while Kalamazoo proper did not hold people, we were not, excuse me, we did not have a contract with ICE. We weren't keeping people. We did not reserve jail space for their purposes, but we would hold undocumented immigrants for ICE to pick up and then transfer to either their least holding areas in Grand Rapids or Battle Creek. So, effectively saying, like, you know, you get somebody arrested for maybe, like, a more generalized crime. You pull up their immigration record. If they're undocumented, our county jail would have alerted ICE and kind of had them determine what to do with it. Now, the Sheriff Fuller, he really did need a lot of public pressure to go out in this. And I think back to a talking point he had at one of the Kalamazoo County Democratic Party meetings. He was basically trying to say, like, oh, well, you know, one of these people, this is a bad dude. You know, he might as well have said, like, bad hombre, really. He was talking about, like, this one anecdotal example of somebody who was arrested, undocumented, and had committed some kind of heinous crime. But, you know, by the flip of the same coin, like, you know, you had our good friend Nelly Fuentes, you know, told this really wrenching story about a woman who was a victim of domestic violence, ended up getting the police involved, found out she was undocumented, and then is currently in legal limbo with ICE, trying to finding out whether or not she's going to get deported. So it goes both ways. Yeah, you might get somebody who's committed some bad crimes, but you also get somebody who's nothing but a victim, be further victimized by the system. So, long story short, after a year of vigils and phone calls and letters and protests around the town, Sheriff Fuller, about a month and a half ago, I believe, announced his actual ICE holds policy, and they aren't going to be doing ICE holds anymore. Now, it could have gone a little bit further. He said there is still. He's basically recognized, Immigration Customs Enforcement is a federal agency, and we are obligated to, cooperate with them to some extent. I guess if I were in his shoes, I'd be like, nah, dude, no, they can go F off. But, I again would probably never be elected as county sheriff. But it is good news.
Well, I mean, you'd probably get elected as a county sheriff, but you'd still have to move up within the police system and do some not good things in the process.
It's that's why the ACAB is the acronym. It's not so much that individual police officers are awful or terrible people, but by virtue of working in the system, they're going to have to do awful and terrible things. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, this is, it's great news because, with the continued work of COSECHA, there's basically no government agency other than the feds themselves, if they were to come into Kalamazoo, a city or township, that could mess with undocumented folks. And we still have the county ID for them, and that was all thanks to them. I hope that this spreads to other cities and townships within the county. We'll see. Probably isn't going to be Comstock anytime soon. I'll say that much. Yeah. But I've been trying to talk them into doing that for Portage. We'll see what happens.
Hey,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I could see Portage doing that, but
I could see Oshtemo doing that.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see what COSECHA does next year. But just wanted to give them a shout out because they've been kicking butt and taking names.
If I were to give an award on a local level for best of the year, it would definitely go to COSECHA as well. I think an honorable mention would go to the homeless encampment.
Oh yeah, I was about to talk about that.
They've done some really fantastic things, but there's also done some other things that we can criticize them about. That I think is part of the reason why their movement, didn't quite go as far as it could have.
I mean, for me, and we'll get a little deeper into that. I think for their part, it was one of the most powerful pop-up movements I've ever seen in Kalamazoo. And what it really did, there's some incredible things that the homeless encampment did. And I think every working class person in Kalamazoo owes them a huge debt of gratitude because, it was about them, of course, but it was also about gentrification. It was about making sure that the people of the city have somewhere to live. And it really tackled issues of, who is this, existential questions about Kalamazoo, of who is this city going to be for? Who is it for? And especially in the wake of the Foundation for Excellence, these were important questions that our city still hadn't really tackled or dealt with.
I think another big point is that the city has thrown around a lot of rhetoric about, we're going to lift people out of generational poverty, which is one of perhaps the leading cause of homelessness, at least in this county. And that's certainly not what's happening. In fact, I wasn't sure who to give worst of the year to for on the local level, but I think it'll have to go to the governments of Kalamazoo County and City during the homelessness movement, because they just
bulldozing those people's belongings
and bulldozing their needs too. They did not. They turned down free money, whether it's from the state or whether it's from the Foundation for Excellence, which is supposed to be for this specific purpose. They were given this free money, and they said they were going to do it to give it to the homeless and the underclassed, and they just didn't, and it's horrible.
I mean, that was the main problem with the city administration from the jump. Is their priority was not working with the homeless people and solving the problem. It was making them invisible again. Yeah, it was getting them out of the park. That was always the priority. And of course, the whole idea of a protest camp is to make your issue visible. And of course, it came to a head, as these things often do, and the city did end up pulling the trigger. I should probably not use that metaphor. The city ended up kicking the homeless folks out of the park. And, I thought was really gross was they said they were going to do it at 7 p.m. on this particular evening in October. And, a lot of tons of people showed up to the park to come and support and give solidarity to the homeless folk. They waited until the next morning after everyone had left to actually do it. And like I said, they destroyed people's belongings. Our dear friend Paula, who lent some of her cooking skills and equipment to the camp, had hundreds of dollars worth of her belongings destroyed, stuff that she uses in her day-to-day life and her business. And also, she also props to her, she'd gone out and done this kind of stuff for the folks at Standing Rock. So just rubbing it in the face of the homeless folks and destroying their property and really screwing out their allies. And I think the biggest disappointment, we had Michael Reiser on the show a couple weeks ago to kind of give an update. The city never got around to figuring out winter housing for these folks. I still know a few people who are out camping in Kalamazoo. And granted, luckily for them, it's been a fairly mild winter, but it's still just unacceptable. That was the one huge short-term problem. Our city could have gone around and that
pretty easily.
Yeah, pretty easily even. Yeah, but it revealed to me a lot of NIMBYism. There were people who actually offered their land to the homeless folks, and as I believe,
there's an example. I can think of a specific example in the Vine neighborhood, where somebody was looking to use it as a house to rehabilitate homeless people in I guess one of the streets, and a lot of the homeowners there really were freaking out against it because it would have decreased the property value or some NIMBYist BS like that.
Or that whole the homeless folks, it's the same thing for my Comstock. We assume because of they are from a particular place or a particular status that they are going to be criminals and disrupt the neighborhood and all this stuff.
One thing I will give to the local governments of Kalamazoo is they did take down that racist statue in Bronson Park.
That was a win. Yeah. Good for us.
One thing I've heard that some people might try to do is get a statue of Abe Lincoln built in its place. And he did. He was I guess net better than most of the presidents out there, but don't forget all presidents are war criminals, and it would still be in really poor taste to replace it with somebody else who's known for killing Native American people.
Especially that, because Abraham Lincoln, he wasn't Andrew Jackson bad, but all presidents back then were pretty awful to natives, and he did some capital G genocide against Native folks, and really it would be in really bad taste to put a mass murderer next to a gravesite of the people he partially mass murdered. That mound. Let's not forget the mound in Bronson Park is. It is, the Native folks do think of it as it's a gravesite. It's hollowed ground. So
don't step on it. Don't put your garbage.
And don't build a statue of a colonizer, man.
I'll also say this as somebody who grew up in Springfield, which is literally Abraham Lincoln's hometown. There's Lincoln merchandise and museums all over the place there. Don't put that there. Put it somewhere else, maybe, sure, whatever. But don't do that.
Why not? What I'm thinking too is why Abraham Lincoln? Why not can't we find?
Well, Abraham Lincoln had a speech in Kalamazoo back when it was called Bronson.
I know that reason, but it's why can't we find? Can we find some famous Kalamazoo figure to build a statue of? Or maybe an art piece.
It doesn't have to be Tim Allen. We could definitely not do Tim Allen.
No, not Tim Allen. Oh, man.
That one guy from Red Hot Chili Peppers, maybe. We could build a statue of him.
Yeah, but Kalamazoo's got a pretty rich history of movement activists and even some of our former mayors and stuff are Robert Jones is a pretty good guy.
Oh, really?
So the city. We still need to get our S together when it comes to the homeless issue, because this is an issue that is not going away. It's only going to get worse. We've talked in the short term. We've got they are chewing at the edges of particularly the Vine neighborhood and North Side. There are people who want to make Kalamazoo again as we see in so many downtown centers, like it's reverse white flight. They're trying to make this area nice and cultivated for, you know, upwardly mobile people, the rich business class, to come in and have town houses and apartments, while kicking out a lot of the working class people who live in these areas. So it is a problem that it's definitely not just the homeless. If we don't think, if Kalamazoo can't come up with a holistic solution to this problem, where things are only going to get worse as time goes on, especially looking out a few decades into the future, a lot sooner than most people think. You know, we are going to be facing, we're going to have actual climate refugees that are going to be needing a place to stay. And let's not forget, the state of Michigan, as it's, a lot of scientists have seen that forecasted that our climate is going to be less severely what's the word? Destroyed, or
it's going to be not as bad here.
Not
once
as
climate
bad.
change really starts killing people to bigger extent.
So basically at the same time at the end of the century where, certain cities are just literally going to be unlivable, like Phoenix, like a lot of the other desert states. Kalamazoo and Michigan is basically going to have the climate of Georgia. You're going to be able to plant corn in the Upper Peninsula, and it's basically going to be kind of like the same conditions that the southeast is right now. And so, we, like I said, if we don't figure out homeless problem now, it's only going to be that much worse when we're having thousands and thousands and thousands of people moving up here to seek refuge.
I mean, it still was one of the best pop-up movements I've seen in my time in Kalamazoo. I was really impressed by what they were able to accomplish. And I think something I'll also mention in terms of the homelessness, if you're not seeing them now, it's because a lot of times the homeless will migrate between different states when the changing of the seasons. They'll I was just in Texas for the holiday, and people were talking about how all of a sudden there's all these homeless again during the winter. Well, that's because they saved up what little money they had to get a Greyhound ticket down there and not freeze to death out in Michigan or Minnesota or wherever. So if you're not seeing them, don't think that they're just not around. They're not around. They're probably just somewhere else. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But you have to acknowledge the good with the bad. This was 2018 was also the year that Bernie Sanders threw sex workers under the bus.
I was hoping to talk about stuff like that because this year also had a lot of really significant attacks on sex workers' rights that really went underreported on the federal level. And I guess to a lesser extent, on even some not really government level, just some tech companies kind of going along with it, or people doxing sex workers, stuff like that. And it's really awful, and it's also something that I'm not really hopeful for, because of the huge amount of Congress that voted for FOSTA SESTA. Even if Trump tried to veto it, he couldn't, because that many people in the U.S. House and Senate voted okay on it. One thing on the federal level, and I guess one thing national topic I should say that is I'm more positive about is I guess gun control, because students were really came out for that in a way that we also really haven't seen before, and the NRA is about to go bankrupt because it's the NRA is consistently losing members at this point, and with that lawsuit from New York that basically said that you can't create gun murder insurance, just it's draining them of all their resources, and they won't be able to operate the way they did before. And I think I'm interested to see how the political map might change the result of that, because of course the NRA donates disproportionately to the Republican Party, even if a lot of Democrats aren't doing enough about it, or if even some Democrats that they also donate to prevent gun control from happening. Now, we did just last week talk with some people from the Socialist Rifle Association, which I like their angle on a lot of things about kind of education on gun safety and how to use and proper gun use, which is what the NRA used to be, on top of like, the whole leftist ideology that the SRA tries to sell. But I really hope they can pick up on this diminishing NRA in its wake. But we'll like really see how that pans out. Now, I'm still like, I personally would still consider myself in favor of things like background checks, things like maybe a ban on assault rifles, things that like most other countries in the industrialized world have, that prevent these kind of massacres from happening in the U.S. But I think what also has made gun violence such a uniquely American problem is I'd say like a lot of our military adventurism abroad, because like a lot of people have that mentality of bring it home, and the fact that we manufacture so many assault weapons is a result. Something interesting, like the times you see the biggest upticks in white supremacist groups in the U.S. as like the periods like just after a war. And
that's true.
We're not seeing any slowdown to like the war machine at this point. So like it's I guess if you draw that specific conclusion, like the whole Trump phenomenon isn't terribly surprising. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add, I guess, on the whole issue of guns or any other national topics?
I will say I would invite people to again, another year, another round of mass shootings, and I'm sorry, I was just
337.
I was just in the bathroom when Nora was talking about this, so sorry I can't address specifically.
Oh, don't worry about it. I think I covered most of it.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I'd really add to that is I'll kind of repeat something I said after so the March for Our Lives, which happened last year, it's 2019, you remember.
It was still happening, it was still happening in 2018, that's the year that just happened.
Yes. So, I want to give like a shout out, or props that is, to the March for Our Lives movement. In particular, what I saw here in Kalamazoo, it was one of the most, and granted, I definitely didn't go to as many rallies and stuff this year, protests, as I did in 2017 or definitely in 2016. But that one I will always remember, because the speakers that they had, ranging from like 5th grade through high school, they were all so incredibly articulate. And also, all of these young people just had this innate, I don't even want to say instinct. They just understood these issues as being intersectional in a way that older people don't, and even millennials, like I think, kind of picked up as a second language. These kids, like I heard a high school kid who was about 14 years old talk about imperialism during a speech at the March for Our Lives.
That's not something you see every day.
No, and it's like, I'm thinking back, like, when I was that old, like, the most cerebral revolutionary material that I was, like, talking about or exposed to was, like, Public Enemy, which, is dope as hell, but I wasn't thinking about in terms of, like, empire or Marxism or any of that stuff. And these kids, they get it. They get it. And, like, that was one of the most hopeful things I saw the whole year, was just how these kids, they innately understand how all of these issues are tied together, racism, capitalism, and militarism and the gun issue. He talked a lot about the militarization of police and just like the proliferation of arms, in our country as being like innately interrelated.
I think people are really becoming aware of things in like a way that's like, hasn't happened before, and it's certainly not stopping. Like even with people like who used to be reactionaries are starting to catch on to more things. Like everyone in Michigan knows now that it should be like snowing really hard right now, but it's not. Like you can't really deny science for that much longer. I was with both sides of my family for like one for Thanksgiving, one for Christmas, and like I was ready to call them out on racist BS, but like I just didn't hear it. Maybe it snuck past me or something, but like it's like, and none of them were saying any like significantly anti-science stuff. Like they'll probably still vote Republican, but like they really weren't like they were they seem more sympathetic to Palestine before. That's nice, something I would have expected from my immediate parents, but I don't know if anyone else has had that this year with coming back to relatives less racist than usual.
Oh, yeah,
but that I feel like it's been happening. That's what I've been hearing from a couple other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is good to hear. I think there are certain issues that you do. Something we always do forget is they're real. Trump has a dedicated base, but it is still a spectrum. Not everybody is just denying everything and is swearing fealty to Daddy Trump. I mean, there are people who still think he's a good president, but maybe they believe that. Climate change is a thing, or they are starting to open their eyes on certain things. When we talk about talking to reactionaries and having those conversations, keep in mind too, you're not going to change anyone's mind through one masterful conversation, or it's oh, I won the debate. I won the debate. You're a socialist now. No. You kind of.
Winning the debate is a bait.
Yeah, that's exactly. You really got to hope is you kind of plant seeds. In someone's head, you make them question things, and then organically they will come to a different understanding. Excuse me.
Is there I'm trying to think of other national topics, because I want to talk about a couple statewide things before we close too.
All right. I do want one last little stinker award to the climate change vis-a-vis Kalamazoo towards the end of this year. At least with last winter, when we had freakishly warm weather, it was sunny, so I got to enjoy my climate Armageddon. This year it's just been 40 degrees and rainy for 2 months, so not only am I reminded about our impending doom every day, but I'm not even able to enjoy it. But yeah, let's talk about the statewide stuff. We gave the final damage report of what passed and what didn't on our last program, and now we can come back and tell you
what got signed and what didn't.
What got signed and what didn't. So I don't know. Do you want to take this? Nora?
The short version of this is I didn't look at a lot of this. I didn't look at everything he specifically signed and didn't sign. But
there is good news and bad news.
Yes, he did not sign off on either of any of the bills that would have stripped power from the new Democratic executives, being the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, or the new governor, which also means that you can still disclose Foundation for Excellence donors.
Yeah, so, he voted that down as well.
Yeah, that was in the same one for the SOS. Wait, was it?
Yeah, it was two different bills. Huh. But yeah, that was very important. Dark money, donors will have to publicly disclose themselves still. And that is going to be a win, not only for the state of Michigan, this is something we were very nervous about here in Kalamazoo, because it would have made, if it had passed, it would have basically made all of the Foundation for Excellence donors anonymous, and that would have basically meant a dictatorship of capital by capitals you don't even know. Hypothetically, imagine the worst billionaire you can. That person could buy the city tomorrow, and you'd have no idea, or you would have no way of finding out.
Yeah. So, get ready for Amazon HQ3 in Kalamazoo. All right, but I guess on more seriousness, the bad news is, as we've already know, he basically repealed the minimum wage and sick leave, which happened a while ago.
Yeah.
And in terms of ballot initiatives, he also did sign the bill making it essentially impossible to pass a ballot initiative, which is perhaps the most egregious thing. I know he signed a couple of the anti-environmental bills beyond the Line 5 tunnel. I don't remember which ones those were specifically. But if I had to give an anti-award to on the statewide level, it would have to go. It would be a tie between the Michigan State Republican-led legislature and the people in charge of MSU, because the Michigan legislature, the Republicans have even if it didn't all get signed, they were passing one horrible, egregious thing after another, or they were super complicit in allowing some horrible stuff to continue happening, pollution, Line 5, Flint, all this other stuff, and they passed that, that horrible, Medicaid work requirements, even if they took out the super racist part of it. And they didn't, push back when Bill Schuette, tried to weaken LGBT rights in the state. But I guess why I'd tie it with give them a tie between the MSU Board of Trustees, that like they were like, not only did the MSU put up with Larry Nassar for too long, they tried to put somebody who's complicit like right back in his place, and they and they like, you know, allowed Richard Spencer to go onto their campus and like give a speech, which made us need to do M5 in the first place. And not only that, they're still like increasing tuition and people still want to go there, which blows my mind to this day. Like, it's just so arrogant of them, and I'm mad about it.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely should be, and you know, like I feel like it was one last spit in the eye on the way out, because you know, you give credit. I don't even really want to give Rick Snyder credit for the stuff he did veto, because even from the stuff that he vetoed is still self-serving in a sense. Because I feel like, you know, that the trying to hamstring the Attorney General's power, any forward-thinking Republican governor would realize, well, eventually we will have an Attorney General again, and we would not want these stipulations on them. So I felt like it was, if anything, it was just kind of pragmatic. Thinking about their own power dynamics. I guess I will give him a little bit of credit for, you know, protecting dark money, but everything else was either to pollute our environment or, you know, strip Michigan voters of their democratic autonomy, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, gross. Good riddance. He did some cutesy video with his wife the other day. Oh, we're going to explore the waterfalls up in the UP. Hope you fall into an oil pipeline. Go drink some lead-lined water.
Oof.
Yeah. All right, so we got about, 12 minutes left on the program. I'm not too sure. I got much more to talk about from 2018 before we go to our kind of closing segment.
I have a little bit more to talk about for 2018. So, if I had to give an award to, like, I guess, best for the statewide, it'd have to go to, I'd say, like, I'm going to tie again, I'm going to cheat. That would have to go to the M5 protesters for, like, getting rid of Spencer essentially once and for all. Yeah. And for Dana Nessel for, like, her, like, running her tireless campaign, for being, like, something to look forward to, you know, past the primary and into the general election of 2018. And I'm really excited now that she won't have her power taken away from her. I hope that she, like, you know, tries to court challenge the bill that will make it impossible to do a ballot initiative. Because,
and she is now in the position to do so.
Yes, I think she's just newly inaugurated. I want to, we'll have to make sure that she does what she says she's going to do, but I think we can trust her more than most.
So
I'm also going to go quote this article here. Like, this is a bit more national in scope, but there's this article. It says, like, 2018 belonged to trans people. It's commonly called 20-gay-teen, but happy 20-bi-teen now, happy new queer. But to quote the article, it's been a tumultuous year for trans rights thanks to the Trump administration. First, the HUD Secretary Ben Carson argued allowing trans women into women's shelters would make cis women uncomfortable. Then, months after Trump appointed Mike Pompeo to Secretary of State, reports resurfaced that trans people's passports were being retroactively denied. In fact, I found that out even when I submitted mine in and got it expedited and everything. They changed my marker, but they said, "Oh, you're going to need to submit another thing, and you'll have to renew it a lot quicker than usual." I'm like, "Screw you!" But I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. To top it off, the memo unveiled the Trump administration's plans to erase transgender identities from civil rights protections, which calls the suicide hotline trans lifeline quadrupled after the story broke in October, and new callers doubled. It's been a troubling and demoralizing year for trans people, especially trans women, who are often the direct targets of Trump's anti-trans policies. Yet, despite some of the worst political attacks against the trans community from the federal government to date, 2018 was also a banner year for trans visibility. From Massachusetts to Anchorage, voters shut down laws that would have jeopardized trans people's safety. Virginia Eastern District Court ruled in trans teen Gavin Gim's favor, arguing the school suggested him to sex stereotyping by denying him access to the boys' bathroom. And finally, ongoing problems with targeted harassment. Twitter banned misgendering and dead naming of people. And they also bring up trans representative and positive art like the Zombieland saga and the Pose series on FX. as well as these novels, The Pervert and Little Fish. The article even mentions the trans game developer Nova, who is really able to really push representation. This is all from the Daily Dot. It's an opinion piece they put out on the 17th of December. I definitely recommend reading it. But if I were to give, I guess, a reward for best of the year, I'd have to say it would go to Ocasio-Cortez. Despite, how little, how disappointing, I guess, the 2018 elections were in terms of, actually getting good things from people. So watching her advocate the way she does and also just dunk on people on Twitter, endlessly amusing me. And she has the establishment just shaking, and she's one woman. She was bartending just last year.
And it's don't become a Marxist sourpuss on me. I know a lot of people have not a lot of people. I sometimes I get too caught up in the online leftist echo chamber, but some people it's whoa, she's a social democrat and blah blah blah. But it is so refreshing to have somebody who is left of center being vocal and challenging stuff in Washington. And it's no, she's probably not going to smash the state in the next couple of years, but it is so refreshing to have a real fighter who you could actually say is on the left in Washington. And you have a couple of those in there, I would say Bernie Sanders might qualify, and but again, Bernie Sanders would be considered moderate anywhere else in the Western world. It's just our politics have been dragged so far right over the last several decades. It's nice to see people who are actually on the left get elected into major office, and that includes also, Michigan's own Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar out of Minnesota.
Don't you know?
So I think wherever you fall on the political spectrum, that should at least you should at least enjoy the catharsis of seeing those. It's been hilarious to see Fox News react to people who are on the actual left. It's they have these crazy ideas about feeding everyone,
giving them healthcare, education.
Man. All those things sound kind of good, actually. I think with that, why don't we close? I want to ask you a question, Nora.
Yeah.
And so when you ask people their New Year's resolution, I want to ask, what is your New Year's revolution solution? And here's what I mean by that. What are you going to focus on in your activism and your advocacy this year, whether strategically or just what do you want to bring to 2019 as an activist?
I think what I want to continue seeing is I think we need to really start shutting more stuff down in the streets the way that we're seeing in France. I want to see more people being able to spread the truth in ways outside of the social media bubbles. I want to see more people at least trying to vote with your dollar. And I know that's difficult to impossible with the way monopoly capitalism's really ravaged our economy. But it's still really possible. You can still build solidarity networks like this. And I want to see I guess in terms of the whole working within the voting / political system, we need ballot initiatives right now on every state in the country to get at least by the state by state level, get each state to do 100% renewable energy within at least 10 to 8 years. Don't think it can't happen. If the law will force it, then the law will force it. And we have 12 years to change something about this. And doing that, even in a few states, could make a huge difference. I think we need to see, if we're going to see something change electorally, ballot initiatives to expand voting rights and allow ranked choice voting, preferably at the same time, just get it all out of the way at once. Because we're not going to get it through this two-party duopoly. And if we're able to, push back against the voter suppression in a way that they can't take away from us, and like give an actual solution to ending the two-party system and perhaps even the Electoral College, then we won't have to deal with the stranglehold in our political system for very much longer.
Yeah, that is a nice one, Nora. So I guess my New Year's revolution solution, what I'm going to work on in 2019. Again, I think we'd really like to hear some input from the listeners as well. Kind of like, what would you like to see change with the show? What do you like about the show? What would you like to expand? I think in the context of the show, I'm going to make more of an effort to make sure that we bring on interesting guests. Granted, all of my co-hosts are brilliant, awesome working class folk, but
thank you.
Yes. But I think I definitely want to make more of an effort to include the community as much as I can, as well as other leftward thinkers that I think y'all out there in Radio Land would like to hear from. On a personal level, I really do want to get more prolific with my organizing efforts this year. I'm going to be doing some work to help reboot the Kalamazoo Socialist Party, and part of that is I really want to focus on not only educating my fellow workers about our shared socialist history, but also more practical things as well. We've been talking a lot about trying to organize self-defense courses, maybe even like a Socialist Rifle Association chapter around self-defense. And it kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier in the program, which is the revolution will come whether the bourgeoisie want it or not. And our ability to guide that revolution is going to depend on how to what degree we've gotten our other working class folk ready for it in the right direction. Because if that moment of rebellion, uprising happens without anything to back it, then it would be quite easy for the reactionaries to seize it. I mean, let's just look at what happened in 2016. Look at what happened with because Occupy didn't have much of a political trajectory. After the initial protests, you saw the Tea Party rise up in its wake to kind of deal with those from a reactionary institutional perspective. So that's like my big New Year's revolution solution. In addition, I think just trying to work with my comrades across the globe to make it clear this year that climate change is not only a thing, it is about the future and survival of the human race. I hope, as much as I don't, I do think we need a revolution. I don't think you can do something like this through reform. It will be interesting to see how this plays out in the upcoming presidential primary, how much they're able to talk about this in honest terms, because next presidential election could determine whether or not there will be any kind of institutional force that is even trying to solve this problem. Or if not.
I just wanted to add, there's a whole lot going on in this world, all the time. I'm kind of glad that we didn't talk about the 2020 race for once. And don't worry, there'll be plenty of time for that later.
We'll have 2 years to talk about that. Oh man. I'm sure when we come back next week, we'll have some things to say about it. But for now, it's about 8 o'clock. We should close out the show. Any other thoughts?
I just want to recap, I guess, my best and worst of the year. For local, best would go to Cosecha, worst would go to the city and county during the homeless encampments. For statewide, best would go to Dana Nacelle and the M5 protesters. Worst would go to the Michigan State Legislature and the leaders at MSU. For national, I would say that best goes to Ocasio-Cortez and worst goes to... I just say the Trump administration broadly, not even Trump himself, but the people around him who are actually able to accomplish the horrible stuff that he's advocated for. Mm-hmm. And internationally, I'd award the best to the Yellow Vest movement in France and the worst to Bolsonaro in Brazil. So can you recap your best and worst, Andy?
Goodness, not too much different from yours, but okay, I'll say Local level highlight of the year, I would say the people who organized the actual protest camp. Again, I think they framed housing and affordable housing issues in a way that really needed to be, and the conflict between our city's oligarchs and the working class folk. Worst locally, well, probably PFAS, the PFAS situation in Parchment. Again, that's late-stage capitalism for you. They leave industrial ruins, and they don't clean up after themselves. Statewide, worst is the lameness of the lame duck, of course. Best, I would have to say, is... all of the ballot initiatives that came through this year, including legalization of marijuana, going to curtail gerrymandering and expansion of voting rights. The worst internationally, I would say, again, the IPCC report. We got 12 years to stop Armageddon, folks. Clock is ticking. Tick tock, tick tock. And the best, I guess what I would say, in a year that brought us a lot of bad news, it was still very uplifting to see, local level people organizing, not just here in America, but here you saw people in Mexico, people in France, as we said, taking the oligarchs to task.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's what I'd like to see, much more of that from the coming year as well. So, all right. Y'all been listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.